What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Crossover U College Hoops Talk podcast, which you can find, as always, on the Crossover channel. My name is Kanaye, and I'm joined with both Josh and Armaan today for a very special episode, something that's kind of been long overdue for us to make, that being a 2025 NBA Draft Top 30 Big Board. Basically, what this is not necessarily a mock draft, but just us ranking what we feel are the top 30 prospects going into this NBA Draft. Of course, some players might end up getting picked in the positions that we have them in, but this might vary a little bit from what you see on some of the mock drafts that, for say, ESPN and Bleacher Report put out. But basically, we're going to be going over each player. Of course, some players might be worth talking about more than others. Cooper Flag, great example. I don't think he needs all too much discussion. But we're basically going to give feedback on what we saw out of players in this past season in college basketball, and if they played multiple years over the course of their careers, what they were able to do when they were in school, and what they can bring to the pro level to an NBA franchise. But before we get into that, if you like this podcast or anything else you see on this channel, please engage with our content any way you can, whether it's liking our videos, subscribing to our channel, or just telling other people about it. It really does all help with growing what we do here at the Crossover. So let's get right into it. I don't think, again, this really needs much discussion. Cooper Flag has been the number one pick since he got on campus at Duke. He lived up to the hype, was one of the best freshmen we've ever seen in the history of the sport. And of course, I think everyone in the entire world has Cooper Flag going number one to the Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah, that's a pretty solid choice. We've been covering it for over a year now, how great Cooper Flag has been, not only at Duke, but in his high school career. There's nothing else really to put it for.
Yeah, and he's a great two-way player, really talented playmaker with the ball in his hands. He obviously can get into the mid-range a little bit. Needs to improve a little bit in terms of his consistency shooting from beyond the arc. But again, great defender. He's going to be a great player for a long time in the league. I definitely think he could play 10 to 15 years easily, probably more than that. And I think he'll be a double-digit time all-star. Definitely, I think will have a chance to be a top 5 player in the league at some point in his career. And at worst,
he doesn't get traded to the Lakers for.
Yeah, and barring any Nico Harrison drop on
tonight, they got replacement. Say what you want, but this is probably one of the best scenarios any first overall pick can get. He can be in the NBA Finals at the end of this season.
I wouldn't say this year. Kyrie's still out. That's actually better. There's rumors they might trade Anthony Davis, but honestly, even whether they keep him or move him, perfect fit, Dallas. Make him. He can be transitioned into the guy. He may not be the guy first year, but he can be transitioned into it.
Yeah, and I think at worst in his career, Cooper Flag is the third best player on a really, really good basketball team. I think John Fanta went on a little bit of a rant and just talked about how good Cooper Flag will be in the NBA. But moving forward, we have Dylan Harper at number 2. I have a really tough time seeing Dylan Harper fall out of the top 2. I think he is probably the best college point guard prospect since Markelle Fultz. Obviously, Markelle Fultz didn't work out in the NBA, but coming out of Washington, he was super, super hyped up. Dylan Harper doesn't stray too far behind. Really solid, productive year in his freshman season at Rutgers alongside Ace Bailey. And I think he's going to be a really good point guard in the NBA. I definitely think at some point in his career, he will be a top 5 lead guard in the league. And Armaan, I'm curious to see, because I know there's a lot of talk about the Spurs potentially trading out at number 2. They're already fairly crowded in the backcourt, specifically a point between both De'Aaron Fox and Stephon Castle. Do you think that they go ahead and take a third point guard in Dylan Harper? Do you think they try to trade?
I feel like, I don't know. It's difficult because obviously, the Spurs, they have a lot of great point guards, but in terms of his fit with Wemby, I think would be elite and would help make this team better. But I think for them, with Wemby, he wants to start, winning more. I don't know if they want to just draft another guy. And there's another thing with De'Aaron Fox. He has 1 year left on his contract. I know he probably wants to extend there. But if they draft Dylan Harper, they can bring him in slowly rather than rushing him in, because there's been a lot of point guards in the NBA recently who have struggled at the beginning of their career. We saw it with Dillingham with the Timberwolves this past year. He didn't really get much playing time. You could see a similar thing happen here if they want to keep the pick and draft him. But in terms of trades, obviously Giannis, that I feel like that would be honestly a better fit. I think is if the Bucks want to just restart, they get the second overall pick. With Lillard out for next year, you have Harper. You can just let him get all the touches in the world to do whatever he wants. But honestly, I feel like the Spurs is probably still the best spot for him. Because he doesn't. You don't need to put him in right away, maybe. But it just depends. Maybe Wemby, having Wemby there, you don't
I've
need to.
heard talks about, again, the Spurs trading out too, potentially using that pick as part of a package to go ahead and try to get Giannis.
Yeah.
Now, do you think in the scenario that happens, how does Dylan Harper fit in Milwaukee? Do you think he's the face of the franchise if that ends up
Yes.
happening?
Oh yeah, because the Bucks, they have no draft capital for the coming years. They have no young talent on that team at all. So you just have to restart. They kind of need to rebuild in a way, and I feel like trading Giannis to San Antonio, getting the second overall pick, that would be like the perfect. He'd be like the perfect building block, towards the rebuild for years. But the only thing worries is if he gets, all these, just unlimited, like unlimited green, what's the word? Green light.
Yeah.
He might end up being Jalen Green 2.0. We
Right.
saw how that
Obviously
went.
the comp. Yeah.
Used
And
to.
I very much feel Dylan has all the tools to succeed at the next level. But I'm curious, Josh, in terms of what you saw out of his Rutgers tape this past season, what do you think Dylan needs to necessarily improve upon when he gets to the NBA?
It's kind of hard to say. Like, listen, this was a guy that arguably coming into this season was expected to be a competitor for Big Ten Player of the Year, and a guy who would have just Ace Bailey expected to make the tournament. None of those happened. They weren't even above 500 at the end of the year. I think that overall, there might not be a problem with Dylan in this scenario. Just Rutgers being Rutgers and the system not working in their favor. I think his defense needs to get a little better. His outside shooting's all right, but I want more from his inside shooting. I get it. He's not going to be a guy for the paint. That's not his goal. But there does need to be more inside scoring. I don't think that even in the NBA, which is very reliant on the three-point shooting, I think he needs to focus more on his in-paint scoring opportunities. The float game is a big deal. I can see a possibility where he has a Trae Young style comp. I kind of like the Jalen Green though. I think the best parts of Jalen Green are what Dylan Harper already has, and I think he could definitely exceed him within the first 2 or 3 seasons. Would I say that Dylan Harper can be a franchise guy for the Bucks or the Spurs or any team he could theoretically be traded to? I don't know. He is a really good second overall. I really think he can be a multi-time All-Star and a second overall good player, and at worst, a role player on a good team. I think that's
Right.
definitely it's a very high floor.
I do want to bring up one thing. Boston could also make a trade for Jalen Brown
So it'll be a good
to
one as
San
well.
Antonio. Pick two could be involved there. Dylan Harper in Boston. I mean, that would be kind of weird. They just got Simons, but yeah, I think the best fit for him still is the Spurs, though, for long term. But if he wants most rookie of the year, most stats early on, Bucks.
Yeah, definitely like that take there. Now moving on to our third best player in our big board, we are opting to go with VJ Edgecombe over Ace Bailey. We'll get to Ace Bailey in just a second, but I would argue VJ Edgecombe is by far the most explosive athlete in this draft. You saw the amount of poster dunks he was able to accumulate in his freshman year at Baylor. I will say he definitely did have a slower start to the season. Definitely got better as time went on. He complements really, really well as defensively. I mean, he's also a really solid playmaker. Definitely as Baylor's season progressed, you could see his perimeter skill definitely evolve a little bit. And just his feel for the game got a lot better. I think he was reading the court much, much better than what he was early in the early stretches of the year. Now, I will say, I definitely think he needs to improve upon his pace and how he plays in terms of operating on and off the ball. There were times where he was a primary ball handler when, for say, Rob Wright wasn't on the court. And then there were times where he had to play off of Robert Wright, playing at the two. Now, I also think he needs to improve a little bit with his off the dribble shooting. I think that's very much still a work in progress, as well as his consistency from beyond 3 point range. But again, really, really high upside player, super athletic, really raw. I definitely think Philly picking him at three would probably be a really good fit. I do feel that Philly needs to get a little bit more athletic in their backcourt. I think Maxey is very quick, but in terms of a guy who has high rise, explosive ability, they don't really have that between both Maxey and McCain. On top of that, those two guys really aren't the greatest defenders either. I think Edgecombe would bring both, again, athleticism and defense to that Philadelphia 76.
Yeah, I know. I couldn't agree anymore. I think, once again, Philly was pretty well blessed with getting the third overall pick. They tanked, very surprisingly. They still have Embiid. They will hope possibly have Paul George. Armaan can with that with a possible trade opportunity, the third overall pick, dumping Paul George in second. But I think that Edgecombe fits that nice. young core, by the way. You know, Jared McCain's still there, Axie's still there, stronger VJ Edgecombe working alongside a guy like Embiid. I think this is a team that can go right back into the top of the standings and, a very quick reload for the Sixers.
I think this is also a place where we could see the trade. Maybe if it's not attaching a pick to Paul George, if they want to get a win now type of piece, because they have the Embiid window, obviously, and the East is very weak. I mean, VJ Edgecombe would be a really good player to add to this team. I think he would be a perfect fit. I mean, based off of his athletic traits and the way his defense is, like he would come in and make an impact right away. I'm just worried for his development. If they keep Paul George, they're gonna want to give him minutes over a young guy, especially because they're a team that's trying to go out there and still try to win a championship in this window they have.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely do think that VJ Edgecombe would fit great in Philly. Now, moving on to probably what is the most, I don't know if polarizing is the right word, but definitely the player with the most controversy surrounding his name entering this draft process is Ace Bailey. Was alongside Dylan Harper as the two-star freshman at Rutgers this past season. Really raw talent. He has great size on the wing. He's really dynamic shot maker, but he tends to lean a lot on him wanting to take a lot of tough shots. I definitely think that hurt his efficiency quite a bit this year at Rutgers. But just with the whole situation of how him and his camp have both kind of carried out the whole draft process. I'm curious to hear about what you think about it, Josh.
First off, I think that he, in a way, is finding a team without the team knowing it. It's kind of a weird method that I don't think works most of the time. I think Bailey's putting himself in a bad position. I honestly don't even see him being fourth. I think he gets picked sixth overall by the Wizards. I think that it would be compliment the young core there. He kind of, in this top five, gives me the most bust vibes. I don't think he will be a bust. There are a lot of concerns. He had a ton of problems surrounding him at Rutgers. He was not the type of guy that we thought he was going to be. He is still completely good, but a lot of his abilities are very raw. There's so much development that needs to be put into him, but he has a very high ceiling and a very low floor.
Right.
I will say, if a team wants to take a swing on him, they should do so past the 5th overall pick. I think he's a guy that could be a steal in this draft, or can be the first major bust that people talk about in the next 2 or 3 years if he doesn't pan out.
Yeah.
Now, Armaan, which team do you think would be the best fit for Ace Bailey?
I feel like it's any sort of team that's kind of, trying to accumulate pieces. They're in a bit of a rebuild, not really trying to compete. I feel like the Pelicans could be a type of team that could want to go after him. I could see the Nets being a team, I think the Nets are probably I think that's the team he wants to go to because, he seems like the kind of guy that would want to play in a, big market New York, and he would get all the touches because, the Nets are just starting their rebuild. I think the Nets probably are the best fit for him too. I mean, because it's like they're not trying to compete. The Wizards also are a pretty good fit. Those two teams, I think, are the two biggest fits. I feel like they both are trying to, they're not really trying to compete. They're trying to get younger players. The Wizards did the same thing 2 years ago. They drafted Bilal Coulibaly. I mean, that one worked out for them, in terms of like a high upside, low floor type player. It kind of worked out for them with Bilal Coulibaly. They're going to try. I could see them wanting to do the same thing here, but I think he wants to be with the Nets, so I think he will end up.
Yeah, I definitely think those landing spots you named would be really good places for Ace Bailey to end up. Now, moving on to who I feel is the best scorer in this draft class, that being Trey Johnson. Really electric freshman year at Texas this past season. It really comes down to just his incredible shot making. I mean, there were times where Texas really had no business being in any games, so Trey Johnson would just solely based off his pure shot making alone keep Texas kind of hanging around in a lot of games. I definitely think he does need to figure out how to be a little bit more efficient when going to the basket, getting into the lane. And he does appear to be a little out of sync defensively at times. But again, it's hard to ignore what he does on the offensive side of the ball. And he's someone who I'm super, super high on, and I think will definitely end up winning a few scoring titles in the league.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree anymore once again. He gives me Carmelo Anthony comps. Definitely a walking bucket. He was such a big deal at Texas, the best Texas freshman since KD. I think arguably an MVP ceiling is for this guy. Once again, I don't really know where he could fit in. He could really be anywhere between 3 and 6 in this draft. I personally think that a team like Philly could swing for him. A team like Utah could go up on that. But I think Armaan has a good idea for this one as well. I've heard him say before.
My number one pick, my number one spot for him would be the Hornets. It sounds like he doesn't want to go there, but I feel like the Hornets because Melo Ball. We know how he is as a playmaker. Adding a scorer like that to a playmaker of LaMelo Ball's caliber. I mean, Brandon Miller is a really good player they have over there. That could be maybe you don't like the fit there. Utah is also a good one. That's also another team I could have said for Ace Bailey too. You know, but they're also in that trying to do the same thing. They drafted Cody Williams last year. They get a pure scorer. I think they want to trade John Collins, trade Sexton. Markkinen could be gone. The Wizards are also another really good team. I feel like the Hornets probably are still the best fit for him. Although the Wizards could also use a really good scorer, I would say the Hornets just because of I feel like the fit with LaMelo Ball, even if he doesn't necessarily want to go there.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great landing spot for Trey. Again, I'm really excited to see him play in the NBA. I think he's going to be really good right away. Another guy who I think is also going to be really good right away is Con Knippel, who we have as our sixth best player in our top 30 big board and going into this NBA draft. Really, really outstanding shooter this past year at Duke. Really productive. I believe was second in scoring on that Duke Blue Devils team behind Coop this past season. I think immediately he's someone you can plug in as a 3-and-D wing to largely most rosters in the NBA. Of course, he's probably going to be on a little bit of a worser team, just considering he's being picked in the lottery. I think on a contending team, he could definitely contribute right away and impact winning, again, immediately. I will say, in terms of his physical makeup, he's quite average in terms of his length. And he's nothing to write home about regarding his athleticism. I do think he isn't the greatest isolation defender either, but it's definitely something that you can mask in a defensive system that they, of course, have in the NBA with whenever they do turn a zone. But again, perimeter shooting is something that NBA teams will always value to the end of time. And I think, again, he's going to be someone who maybe never wows you, maybe is never a true superstar, but someone who's always going to allow you to be in a position to win basketball games.
Yeah, I agree with
And
that.
that
I mean,
brings to Con Knippel.
yeah, I agree with that. I think the really good fit for him would be if the Sixers they want to trade Paul George, attach 3 and Paul George to maybe move down in the draft a bit, like say Utah. I saw some rumors with that. Like if the Sixers went down to 5, I think that would actually be the best fit for him. Or putting him again with a playmaker like LaMelo Ball. The Wizards, they're not really a winning kind of team. I think honestly I can see the Pelicans being a good fit for him as well, just because maybe they're still trying to win with Zion, even if they traded Ingram at the deadline. They still have Zion. They're gonna have Murray come back. You could plug him in there and maybe try to go for something in the Western Conference, but I think he would be a good fit with I think best fit for him would be the Sixers, just because the Sixers not only are trying to win, but he's a win now player, and they're trying to win. And the Eastern Conference, it's significantly easier to maybe make not just the play-in, but the top 6 and make the playoffs through there. So I feel like having a guy like that in the playoffs, I think would be helpful. I think the Sixers are the best spot for him.
Yeah. Now, Josh, how do you feel about Jeremiah Fears at 7?
I kind of like his opportunities. Once again, maybe the OU comp is kind of there, but he gives you Trey Young vibes. Float game's great. He spins, he turns. He's very, very agile guy. An athlete for sure. A little shorter than I think most teams would like, but he could fit very well in Brooklyn, for example. That's a place that he's been slide to go to a few times. I think he would definitely be a possible all-star in his future. He doesn't have a super high ceiling, I'll admit, but if his college tape is anything, he's going to be a freak athlete for the next few years, and I really don't see him dropping anything past 9 in the draft.
Right. And I mean, just going off of his Oklahoma tape, he's in the same boat as Cooper Flagg, where he should probably be a high school senior right now, decided to reclassify ahead and play his freshman year at Oklahoma. I'd argue he has the best ball handle out of any player in this draft. And I'm just really excited to see him play. Like Trey Johnson, really dynamic scorer. I think he's going to bring a lot of offensive firepower to whatever team lands in, which maybe Armaan might have a clue as to what team he thinks he fits best.
Realistic fits. I mean, the Pelicans, they could go out and get a guy like him. I mean, they have DeJounte Murray. which I brought up previously. That's the same position, but you could try to make it work. I mean, it didn't work with Trae Young in Atlanta. I don't know if it'll work, especially with him coming off an Achilles injury. I could see Brooklyn. They don't really have that guy at point guard. That could elevate their offense. Because that could be the type of player that lifts Brooklyn up to the play-in. People don't really realize that, especially with the injuries to Tatum, Lillard, Halliburton for next year. But my number one fit, and this is very unlikely, but I honestly would like to fit with him on the Suns because that's kind of been what they're missing is like a really good point guard to go with Devin Booker. Ever since they traded Chris Paul away, it will be kind of hard because they already have Jalen Green now here, Bradley Beal. If you can move off of, it'll probably be Jalen Green. I think they want to move off of him. Like I feel like Jeremiah Fears and Devin Booker backcourt for at least the next 5 years, and then have Jeremiah Fears take over as the guy for the Suns offense. I think that'd be a really fun fit in my opinion. But it's fair. I know it's unlikely he probably falls to 10, but I do like the Suns fit.
Yeah, I think the Suns is actually a really good shout there. I definitely think they probably do need, like you mentioned, someone who could run the point, play really well alongside Booker. That I know you mentioned they just got Jalen Green in that trade, and who knows what they're going to end up doing with Bradley Beal. But now going on to one of my favorite players in this draft, a little bit of a streaky season, kind of up and down at Illinois, but it's hard to deny the talent. Really great at dissecting defenses and just taking what he's getting off of the pick and roll. I mean, you saw what he did against Arkansas, where he just completely lit them up and dropped coverage. I'm curious to hear about how you feel about Kasparis Jakučionis, Josh.
I kind of have some views on him. The streakiness kind of gets to me. Not that I would put him in a bust category, but I feel like he, at his ceiling, is not the main ball handler for any team. He is a full-time starter, I feel, even on day one, depending on where he goes. I like where he can be. If he's going to be a spot-up shooter, I think he can definitely fit that role. But he also has the length to be in the paint more. I think he can really be a good inside scorer if he kind of goes to that. I don't have an exact comp for the guy because you don't really see players like him too much. But he kind of has like maybe a Denny Abdia style comp. Great outside shooting, pretty decent on the inside, a starter, not a full-timer, but a guy you could use really any day. And I think that's kind of what a lot of teams would look for. Armaan, where do you see him fitting in?
Again, the Suns, that's, they're not going to win now type of player. I think, honestly, my favorite fit, is I like hit 8 with Brooklyn. I think that's a good pick. The Pelicans, I might change it to the Pelicans. I think the Pelicans would be, because you have Trey Murphy's probably on his way out. Herb Jones is probably on his way out. Kind of fill in replacing them with the wing like this would be helpful, especially if they want to keep, the Zion and DeJounte Murray pairing going. I mean, they also drafted Pierre-Bess Missy. They're starting, you could kind of start to see something building if they were to take him at 7, which, I think that would be a good pick at 7 or 8.
Yeah, it definitely seems like Pelicans really can't go wrong no matter who's available at the point of their pick, really just with the guards and wings that are in this top 10. Again, you really can't go wrong with who you end up getting, it seems. Now, for our first international prospect in our big board, it is Noah Sang, who is coming over from Germany. Me and Josh aren't all too familiar with him just because he did not play college basketball this past year. But from what I've heard, he's a really versatile forward who's going to be able to play high-level basketball on both ends of the floor. I have heard he has a little bit of a slighter frame, which might make it a little bit tougher when he's matched up against bigger forwards and perhaps centers in the NBA, which, of course, you're going to see just with how much bigger NBA players are. But again, I think he's really talented. I think it's really raw from what I've heard out of the NBA scouts who have published their scouting reports on Noah. Armaan, I'm curious, do you have a team that you think tries to go and grab Noah in the top 10?
Okay. This team this would make everyone mad just because this team just won the NBA Finals. But I feel like the Thunder would be the team to get him. They did this a couple years ago with Ousmane Dieng, like a similar like a project type of player. Now I could see the Thunder, packaging up some picks, moving up. I could see this could be a pick for the Suns, if they decide, let's just blow it up, trade Devin Booker in the next day. That's probably not going to happen, but that could be a thing. I think the Nets and another, those teams, those rebuilding teams that, could use a project like the Wizards maybe take him. That'd be kind of a reach to take him at 6, but I could see that happening. But the Spurs honestly could be a good pick at 14, if they, valued long term, because they have one of the best player development programs, I could see Atlanta being a team. Like there's not like one specific team. I feel like any team, like the late lottery and then the first few teams outside the lottery, like all of them, I could kind of see taking a chance on him. But the
Yeah,
Thunder is probably the team I think would take the biggest, want to
I
trade
could
up.
see that. Yeah. And now rounding out our top 10 of our top 30 big board, we have our first center to be taken in the draft. I personally believe he should be Derek Queen, who just really stellar freshman year at Maryland, comes from an illustrious Mount Verde program that produced Cooper Flagg, Lee McNeely, Austin Newell, Rob Wright. I would argue he's the most skilled big man in the draft, maybe Danny Wolf. I lean towards Derek Queen just because of the youth and how much potential he has to grow. He's really good when facing the basket, also has a post-up game, really good playmaker with his passing outside the post too. Can play back with his back to the basket. Like I just said, he has a quick first step and being able to get to the into the lane and into the paint to create paint touches. I will say I think he needs to improve on his conditioning from what we saw at Maryland playing for Kevin Willard this past year. But again, I think he's so skilled, and I think he's going to be could end up being a starter right away.
No, without a doubt. I think he is one of the best center talents that we've seen the last few years. Obviously, besides like a guy like Wemby, but when you're looking at him in his player comps, it's a pretty high ceiling. I kind of see him in that like prime DeAndre Ayton role from the start, but with outside shooting because he was a very solid shooter from the 3-point line. He was very decent from the inside as well. You can remember that Colorado State buzzer beater in March Madness last year. I think that he has great clutch abilities, and he was very, very useful in the pick and roll. I like him a lot with his height as well. He would be a full-time starter on most teams, I feel, right now. And if he falls out in the lottery, I would be very annoyed. I think he is so underrated in this draft class.
No, I actually find it funny you brought up DeAndre Ayton because that's my number one fit is his old team, the Suns.
I know that's what I was going to say too.
So
he is a perfect replacement for Ayton, and I think honestly a better player too.
Honestly,
Yeah, I definitely think his ceiling is a lot higher than what Aiden's was.
I have a sleeper fit actually for him as the Hawks.
I can see the Hawks too.
In my opinion, might be the most underrated playmaker. Some people say he might be the best playmaker in the whole league. Putting a center like Derek Queen, because if they don't want to bring, keep having Onyeka Okongwu be their starting center, let Derek Queen be the starting center. That I like that pick at 13. The Raptors, I think, could make some sense. I also just realized I forgot to mention it for Jeremiah Fears, but it's whatever. The Raptors, the Bulls, they probably want to get younger at center. They don't think they want Vucevic there anymore. But I think number one fit still the Suns.
Now getting into our 11 through 20. First of them being Igor Demin, was a point guard this past year for BYU, has really, really great size for a point guard, will be one of the taller lead guards in the NBA next year at standing at around 6'8". He's probably the best passer in the draft. It's really hard to ignore what he does and being able to pick apart what he's getting and reading off the pick and roll. Again, he tends to make the right read almost every time. He isn't the greatest scorer, and he doesn't do anything exceptionally in terms of his athleticism. Also needs to improve with his outside shot. He definitely struggled from beyond 3-point range this past year at BYU. But again, I definitely think he's a guy that you can teach how to shoot. I definitely think that the jump shot looks good. He shot well at the line, which definitely is an indicator that a 3-point improvement is to come. But I'm curious, Josh, how do you feel about Igor Demin's draft stock going into this year's draft?
I'm honestly not too high. He was already very well ranked going into this season. He was expected to be a top 5 draft pick. He did fall quite a bit because of how, not unfortunate, but just how his BYU season didn't really pan out. Despite that, he's great with size and great passing, which you mentioned. I do want to see more development from him. I think that it's not worth him starting his rookie season, but I feel like he'd be a great bench piece and a soon-to-be starter role player in his future years. And so he's a pretty decent ceiling. Floor is not the worst in the world, but I wouldn't really take him anything above 10 in this draft. He's kind of worked his way into the later half of the round.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think for a team fit, I could see the Heat. Well, they actually don't have their pick, do they? They have the Thunder, the Spurs. Those two teams I think would be the type of team for him. I think the Spurs is probably my favorite fit just because, it's like No, he's not there yet, but I think he can get there, and I feel like adding him to their puzzle, like if they don't trade for anybody, I feel like that could be also a good pick having him with San Antonio.
Yeah, and now moving on to our 12th prospect in this big board, we have Carter Bryant at 12. I think a lot of his draft stock is solely based off of his potential and being a really, really strong two-way wing in the NBA. Was definitely had his ups and downs this past year. Arizona kind of had to play third and fourth fiddle at times. Of course, you had the likes of Caleb Love, KJ Lewis, Jaden Bradley on that Arizona Wildcats roster, which of course Carter Bryant didn't have the ball in his hands as much as maybe he could have at a different program. But again, he did have big moments. He also had some mediocre freshman moments, which is what you expect out of a freshman in college basketball. But Arizona had a really solid season. Brown was a big reason why. Josh, I'm curious, based off of Arizona's tournament run, what you saw to Carter Bryant in the NCAA tournament, do you think he ends up being a top 15 pick?
I think he is. I think once again, late lottery. I wouldn't start him. I think he's a great bench guy. Honestly, that's probably where he ends up most of his career. I'm not putting him down as a prospect, but I don't see him really as anything more than a 1 or 2 time All-Star. He has a great outside shooter abilities. He definitely can be that possible 3-and-D guy that any late lottery team is looking for. He's young, so he's very molded. I'm sure really what a team would want from him as of right now, but I do like him off the bench. He's a great 6-man guy, I think, for future opportunities.
Yeah, definitely agree with you there. Now,
Right,
go ahead.
I was gonna say that my favorite fit for him, I think, is the Timberwolves.
Timberwolves, yeah. I actually like that pick a good amount. I do think they need a little bit more shooting just with DiVincenzo not having the greatest year as opposed to what he did with the New York Knicks 2 seasons ago. But yeah,
I
I think
also see Portland being a pick.
yeah, I think that would be a good landing spot there too. And moving ahead to Colin Murray Boyles at 13, he was probably the lone bright spot for a really bad South Carolina team this past year in the SEC. Finished towards the bottom of the conference. But I will say, Murray Boyles brings a lot of toughness down low. Really good playmaker, showcased that with his passing this past year. Also, a guy who can probably guard 1 through 5 in the NBA, I would say, just with the size he's going to be bringing. And on the wing, I'm really excited to see how he's utilized in an NBA offense and defense. Particularly, I think he's a guy who could end up being a first team or at least an all NBA defender at some point.
Yeah, no, I'm not like once again, I'm not high on him. I personally wouldn't put him in my lottery, but at the same time, he was that bright spot for South Carolina. I do think he could have went earlier in the draft if he went a year earlier as well. I don't think the extra college season would have helped him too much. He's one of the older players in this lottery so far, and while he is a taller player, he's not the largest guy, so I feel like he might be limited in his roles. It's not bad. I just don't really know where he fits right now and if he would end up being a starter and in greatest.
I think a good spot for him. The Suns, obviously, if they want to take it, reach at 10. I mean, I feel like more of like a Spurs, Thunder, Hawks, Grizzlies, Timberwolves, even the Heat at 20. Like if he falls there, like I would take him. I feel like those are some of the better fits. He's one of those guys that I think can help, one of those late lottery, and those teams just outside lottery, not take the next step, but be a contributor to helping them, take the next step, whether that is, they winning more games the regular season or going farther in the playoffs or whatever it may be.
Now, here is where this big board definitely strays quite far from where mock drafts have Kaman Malawach listed. Almost every service has Kaman Malawach going in the lottery. And I personally just don't feel he's worth using a lottery pick on. I mean, my mistake, a top 10 pick. He's mocked to go in the top 10 pretty much every mock draft I've seen. I think it's really hard to ignore. I understand he was having troubles with his visa, or there was the concerns about that at the point of the Final Four. But at the same time, for someone who is 7'1", 7'2", to not bring down a single rebound in a Final Four game against an undersized Houston front court, it's just hard to get past that. And if we're being honest, I definitely think he's someone who's still kind of growing into his frame. He definitely tends to process the game a little bit slower than what you want out of someone who you're going to potentially use a top 10 pick on. I definitely think he has offensive limitations as well. But I will say he shot the ball well from 3 in high school, which definitely is a telltale sign that he could be able to do it at the NBA level, where he didn't really do it at Duke whatsoever. I don't even know if he attempted a three this past year for Duke. If he did, it was only like one or two, I believe. But again, it's hard to ignore size. You can't teach height. He has a 7'7" wingspan. Like I said earlier, he's 7'1", 7'2". I'm curious as to how you feel about Kaman Malawach.
I very much agree with your point, Kanaye. I don't really like him too much. Once again, these later lottery picks aren't really the most entertaining for me, I'll admit. And Kaman kind of shows that for me. Not that once again he would be a bust, but there's just something missing in his game that is so noticeable that I feel like once again the top 10 pick isn't worth it. Maybe a late lottery pick. He can be a good starter center, but he has a very low floor. He has a very low floor and not the highest ceiling. I don't really see him being more than a Kelly Olynyk, and even then, his shooting isn't really that good from the outside. He's more or less just an inside the paint scorer, and it is kind of a weird thing to put it as. And this is not once again slanting a guy like Kanaye or Travis Proctor, who also Duke stars going the program, but I think Cooper Flag was such a good player at Duke that he elevated the rest of his team into being these lottery picks or higher level picks. And I think that's kind of a wrong assessment by NBA scouts to look at these players like that, because they were working around one of the greatest college basketball players of all time. I think that in a scenario where he's not given that role, it will hurt him. And I think he will slump originally. He can be a good starter in his later years, but I don't really have the greatest hopes on him in his future in the NBA.
Yeah, I love your point about Cooper Flag. Just the caliber of a player he was probably elevated a lot of the guys on that roster. I will say, I do think Kaman still has Defensive Player of the Year upside as a ceiling. Like you said, though, his floor is really, really low if he does not end up panning out. Armaan, I'm curious as to where you could see Kaman Malawach fitting in the NBA.
The Thunder is probably the first thing that comes to my mind. I mean, Thunder, Timberwolves. I mean, you have, Thunder, Isaiah Hartenstein. He's there for 2 more years, then his contract's up. You could mold him to be kind of a replacement, and he's still a really good defender. The Thunder, their identity kind of was their defense this past year, and I feel like adding a guy like Malawach would be really cool. I feel like in terms of where I think he'll go, I think he's probably the Suns pick at 10, but maybe he goes to like the Bulls or something. But I feel like I think the Bulls probably is where he will end up. But I mean, in terms of fit, I think having the Thunder or Timberwolves, because the Timberwolves also have Rudy Gobert. Can have mold him into the next Rudy Gobert. Maybe not. He probably won't be as good, but just molding him into the next Rudy Gobert for whenever Rudy Gobert's they decide to move on or he ends up retiring in the next few years.
Yeah, and now going to our next international prospect, that someone who we have as 15 in this big board is Joan Berenger, who is coming over from the Adriatic League in France. Again, someone who me and Josh aren't all too familiar with just because he played overseas instead of in college. From what I've heard, he's a center who's going to provide rim protection and can move fairly well. In terms of his weaknesses, I heard he's still very raw and learning how to read the game floor just up to speed with what you would want out of an NBA center. Ron, I'm curious as to where you could see a center like Joan fitting in the NBA.
This honestly seems more like a Thunder pick, or it's like a team like that. I could honestly, like, the Hawks could be another team. If the Heat want to move off of Bam, I've heard some rumors that they might want to move off of Bam. If they want to move off of Bam, just a team that, like, they can put him in right away, and he's probably doesn't have the highest ceiling. But yeah, I think the Thunder, like, this is the same as the last Malawach, I think is how you say his name. Like, he's kind of like the same fits there, maybe, but he'll probably play more earlier on.
Yeah. Now, going on to another one of my favorite players in this draft class, someone who completely outperformed any expectations he had going into his freshman season at Georgetown before he unfortunately got hurt, that being Thomas Sorber. Josh, I'm curious as to how you feel about Sorber.
Honestly, once the injury concern kind of levels him down, I think he could be a late lottery pick depending on how people view him. He's definitely a backup center. Going into his rookie season, he can definitely be that starting role in the future. I do like him a lot. I think he has great inside shooting. He is a good defender, and he led a all-right Georgetown team. They didn't make the tournament, but he made that team feel a lot more alive. than they typically have in the past few years. And I think he really can be a guy for a glue guy at least for a lot of teams in the NBA right
Definitely. I will say, I definitely think his kind of lack of athleticism, or maybe not athleticism, but more so explosiveness, definitely is lacking in terms of being able to raise his ceiling and being a really good finisher at the NBA level, or per se a defensive anchor, rim protector type of center. But I think he has really high level intensity, really long wingspan, and I think he has a great feel for the game and someone who, a few years down the road, could end up being an all star.
Yeah, I think honestly, I mean, it's the same fits. It feels a little lazy, but I feel like most like all these guys, they're centers. I feel like these guys are all kind of have similar fits. I could see. I'm gonna throw out like there's probably no chance this happens, but Orlando's picking at 25. I could like if he fell to 25, that'd be a really good fit. But other than that, I mean, it feels like the Hawks, the Heat under Timberwolves. There's a team that could use maybe want extra depth at the center position. It's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, no, that's a fair take for sure. The next guy being another dynamic scorer in this draft, Jace Richardson, really high upside with his quick ability to just do stuff off the dribble, really get into his bag at times, was a key player for Michigan State this past year in his freshman season. Really efficient shooter, really made little mistakes, didn't make any of the normal freshman turnovers you tend to see out of young guys playing in college basketball. Great pace, really good feel for the game. He's only 19 years old and has a lot of room to grow. I do think he's a little bit passive at times and maybe should have been a more aggressive. I think Michigan State, who lacked offensive firepower at certain points of games in the season, definitely could have used him stepping up more, again, at certain points of the game. But Josh, I'm curious, after Jace's freshman season at Michigan State, do you think it was the right move for him to go to the draft? I know we did touch on this slightly, but do you think he is worth taking in the top 20?
Definitely, definitely. I honestly do see him in a few different roles. He kind of gives me a one-trick pony vibe with him being a very good scorer, but just not like the best defender. He's an undersized guard, so I think that will limit him. But I think this was the right choice. And I also do feel like because he went to Michigan State, Izzo has a very specific program that kind of levels guys into roles that don't really make sense for the NBA. I think that's kind of why he was a more passive scorer than anything else. He definitely has the aggressive side to him. He's a very hungry guard at times, and he was one of the better three-point shooters on a team that was well known for its lack of three-point shooting. Obviously, college basketball three-point shooting isn't as important as it is in the NBA, and I think his focus would be a lot more on that. But he is a perfect background point guard. He coming off the bench. Honestly, and I think Armaan can chirp about this one. I think he fits so well with the Atlanta Magic as a background guy for them. Definitely a depth piece for future teams that would draft.
Well, I love that Orlando pick, but for me, like he just screams Pelicans to me for some reason.
It's not a bad idea.
But I mean, I like the Orlando fit.
Yeah, I also like the Orlando fit a good amount too.
They did just get Desmond Bane, but yeah, you can never have too much shooting. I mean, Orlando was the worst three-point shooting team in the league last year, so adding a guy like that would definitely help.
Definitely can't go against having more three-point shooting. Next guy being Austin Newell, another guy, like I mentioned earlier, coming from that illustrious Montverde team 2 high school seasons ago. Really great size from Asa. He's really mobile for someone of his stature. He's aggressive, keeps the intensity level high. One of the big reasons why the Georgia Bulldogs program made the NCAA tournament this past year. I will say, I do think that he tends to be a little out of control when going to the basket, and he definitely needs to improve with his perimeter shooting, just considering he's a guy who you probably kind of want to put in some pick and pop actions in the NBA. But again, he's young, he's going to be able to grow, and I definitely think he's going to be a good player for a long time.
Certainly. I kind of like him in Georgia. He's definitely a prospect that rose a lot this previous year. The Montverde comp, or the Montverde high school experience really helps him out. Definitely a early 20s, late teens type of draft right here. I don't really have a lot to say on him, I'll admit. I liked his game, but I don't feel like he would start right away. Definitely a guy who could in the future, but this is a market where there's a lot of high-level centers. I don't think he should be a center. He's only 6'9". I think power forward position is probably the best place for him, but he can do a lot of shooting off the rim if that's something that he can be developed to do.
All right, yeah. I would say, I mean, for team fits, Utah, Brooklyn, the Wizards, I could see him fitting with Alexander Sarr. Like, those are some teams to throw out there. Maybe the Hawks too. I mean, just with the fit with Trae Young, but
Yeah, and now kind of going forward, we start to get into some of the middle of the pack and contending teams. I'm very curious as to where some of these guys fit into the fold on some of those better NBA rosters now. Curious to hear your picks, Armaan being our NBA resident expert here at the crossover. But this next guy is Nick Clifford. He's one of the oldest players in this draft, definitely someone who was a late bloomer. He's 23 years old right now, but he played at an All American level down the stretch of the later parts of the year for Colorado State. Was a big reason why they nearly beat Maryland. Of course, like you mentioned earlier, Josh, they fell victim to the Dairy Queen buzzer beater. But I do think he still has some things to improve, specifically with his outside shooting and how he can kind of use his physical tools to really just fit in defensive schemes in the NBA. But I think he has really solid size for someone who's going to be playing in the backcourt. He's a two-way talent. Did play at the mid-major level, so we haven't seen how he plays against some of the higher levels of competition, but I think he had a really good game. Great showing, I should say, in the NCAA tournament. But I definitely think he's a guy who has a really, really high floor. And again, these are now the contending middle of the pack-ish teams that we're getting into now at this point of the first round. And I definitely think he's someone who is a little bit older, might not have as high of a ceiling or level of potential to reach as some of the earlier guys we talked about in this video. But right away, he's going to be able to contribute on both sides of the basketball.
I love Nick Clifford. He is such a good older prospect. Obviously, you can give the Dalton Next comp from last year. Older guy, works his way into the, kind of an interesting position where he can do. He can play, honestly, a couple big roles right away. I think he's a guy that has not a low floor, but his floor is very close to his ceiling in that he's already kind of there as a player. You can use him right away. And I think even still, despite his age, he could be a riser on draft night. I can see him sneaking his way into the late lottery. He is very underrated as a prospect.
yeah. So it's like, I mean, the Grizzlies just traded away Desmond Bain, so he could fit in perfectly right there. The Thunder, Timberwolves. Maybe not as much the Timberwolves, but I mean, I feel like the Grizzlies is probably my favorite fit. I mean, the Heat, I also could see being a fit here. I mean, the Heat, like, maybe not as much anymore, but they know how to get the most out of, other players. So I could see, teams like that, the Hawks, the Magic if he fell, but I think, I think the Grizzlies will end up taking him on draft night.
Yeah, I like those fits a lot. I think any team that ends up picking him will immediately benefit from what he brings to the table. But now at 20, we get to talk about the reigning Final Four most outstanding player, Walton Clayton Jr. Incredible season at Florida this past year. Was a first-team All-American. One of the greatest tournament runs we've seen in the history of the sport, with just the amount of clutch shot making, NBA level threes he hit time after time. I unfortunately had to watch that against UConn in the second round of the NCAA tournament. Really just backbreaking threes he hit at the end of that game. Did that throughout the entirety of the tournament. We struggled a little bit on the offensive side of the ball against Houston the first half of the national championship game, but when they needed him to, he was able to knock down shots. He's a guy that I think is older, but is definitely someone who is worth looking at in the late lottery and in the top 20 for sure. I think immediately, I mean, as a Heat fan, I would love to have Walter Clayton Jr. in Miami. I've seen a lot of mock drafts pick Miami to draft Walter. I think he would have fit great alongside Hero, just being able to take a lot of the offensive pressure off of Hero, who just came off his first year, kind of being the main option for the back portion after Jimmy Butler was traded. But again, it's hard to ignore. I understand he's a little bit older, probably doesn't have as high of a ceiling as some of the other guys in this draft. We look at what happened with Jalen Brunson, was a little bit older coming out of Villanova, stayed in school for 3 years. But now you look at what he is on the New York Knicks, being their go-to guy, clutch shot maker. That's Walter Clayton Jr., I think, has the potential to be.
Yeah, no, I 100% see it. I really don't know why teams would pass on him past the 20th overall pick. He definitely is, a prospect, but he is a plug-and-play guy almost immediately on the court. He has the NBA shooting level. He has the clutch gene. And he's a winner. He's a guy for it. And keeping him in Florida would be all the fun things that you want to see. So I really like the comp and the location of his draft pick, and I think he's gonna have a good career.
Oh yeah. So I know you brought up the Heat, but I think the other Florida team, that's like the dream fit in my opinion. The Magic. I mean, they still need a point guard, and to have a guy like that, for a team that's aspiring not just to be, they've been a playoff team the last couple of years, the middling playoff team. They're aspiring to take that next step into contention, and adding a guy like this, I think, will help them a lot. I think the Magic is probably my favorite fit. But yeah, the Heat, I also like the Heat fit. I mean, if he ends up going a little bit earlier, you could see a team like, the Timberwolves or somebody take him. But I feel like or the Nets. I could see that. I like the fit with the Nets too. Jazz is another one. But I think, yeah, the Magic is my favorite fit. I don't know if he's going to fall to 25, but uh, that's my favorite fit.
Yeah, definitely a good chance that Walter ends up staying in the state of Florida. Now, getting on to our 21st prospect in our big board, that is Liam McNeely. Up and down year, depending on how you look at it, in his freshman season at UConn. For someone who is advertised as the best shooter in this past year's freshman class, he was fairly inefficient, shot 38% from three for the season, but definitely as the year went on, specifically in Big East tournament and the NCAA tournament, he did not shoot the ball efficiently whatsoever. I definitely think he has a tendency to get kind of antsy at times, and I think he needs to kind of just relax and let the game come to him. But I will say there were stretches of the season where he looked like a top 5 freshman in the nation and definitely has high scoring upside. He had a 38-point game at Creighton this past season. And he has the ability to shoot NBA range 3-pointers. He can shoot off the screens. Again, it's a matter of him trying to become more efficient. But I will say for someone of his size, he does a really good job of navigating screens and going to the basket.
Yeah, no, he definitely is a guy that once again needs more development. And I will say this, and this is more of a personal opinion, I think the NBA, or at least NBA GM, should be using the G League a lot more for the later first round and early second round prospects. I think McNeely should start in the G League next season and work his way into a starting roster. I think he's a guy that once again has a lot of raw talent and should be worked on in the offseason or during the season, but not on the team itself. He's definitely a guy that could start on the team in a few years from now, but right now I don't really think it's worthwhile to put him in any NBA minutes roles because putting him on the bench really doesn't really help him out.
Yeah. So, in terms of fit, the Magic, obviously, they could use more shooting. Obviously, they're fit, but honestly, the Thunder's, like, if they were to have a weakness, they're not the best 3-point shooting team. So adding a what some people say is the best shooter in the class to the Thunder. I mean, if he won't play right away, that would actually be super beneficial to them and would make the rest of the NBA probably mad. But yeah, I think the Thunder's a really good fit.
I can definitely see him fitting on some of those teams. Now getting on to our third international prospect on our big board, that's Hugo Gonzalez. Played at Real Madrid in Spain this past year. Someone who's going to play on the wing. Really solid frame from in terms of what NBA scouts put out regarding Hugo. Now the thing is, he is fairly inexperienced. He only played around 11 minutes a game for Real Madrid. They do play a long season in that league. I definitely heard that he is fairly unpolished, but again, he brings really solid size in the wing. He's 6'6". He's only 19 years old, has a lot of room to grow. Armaan, where do you see Hugo fitting?
Nets. Like having a guy, who's unpolished, there's like most of these teams in the bottom, of the draft, because I feel like he's going to be one of the last 10 picks of the first round, maybe go early second round. Like if he stays in the first round, I feel like the Nets would be the best fit because you can either have him in the NBA, you can throw him in the G League. They're not trying to win right now. You can take a chance, a flyer on a guy like this. At this point, they have both picks 27, so you could see him go in that range. I mean, the Pelicans at 23 could make some sense. Or even if you go into like the early second round, the Hornets have picks 33 and 34. So, those three are probably biggest fits. I don't really see a contending team maybe wanting him just because you would probably rather trade the pick instead of drafting a guy who probably won't work out unless it's OKC. I mean, OKC would be the type of team to still take a project even after winning the finals.
Now, Will Riley fighting Illini to go alongside Kasparis in this first round. A little bit of a slighter, thinner frame. Definitely lacks a little bit of athleticism. That kind of lacks a first step along with that. But he's tall, 6'8", really good scoring instincts. He has the ability to score really from anywhere on the floor. Had really good stretches this past year in Illinois' season. Played for Brad Underwood. Josh, how do you feel about Will Riley?
I like him a lot. He's, once again, very, very raw. We saw a lot of talent from him. We also saw a lot of mistakes in his playmaking. I think he could definitely play behind a very developed and talented team that could grow him into the player he can be. He has a pretty good ceiling for a later first round pick. I don't just trust him starting at any point in his career. I think he could be that type of guy. I would probably put him in the G League as of right now, especially if a championship contending team wants to take a swing on him. He definitely has that outside shooting, and the length that he has, being a taller guy in this draft, would be super helpful. It's why he's here. It's why Underwood used him so well, and I think he is such a once again an underrated talent in this later part.
Definitely. Where do you see Will Riley fitting?
Like probably on the same. Like I can see the Celtics making some sense. If they want to get, they've been wanting to get younger for a little bit.
Yeah,
The Suns
yeah,
can make some sense. Getting younger. I think the Nets as well. Just like I feel like he's gonna be. I feel like he's like looking at this mock draft. They have him going 26 to Brooklyn. I mean, I could see that. I feel like it's just the same around the same teams because a lot of these teams say they're with their second first round pick maybe aren't going to go and they could maybe want to take a flyer on a guy like that.
yeah. I definitely do like the Celtics shout. They do tend to like their taller point wings, like Derek White, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, guys like that. I definitely think Will Riley, like you mentioned, they do want to get younger. I would assume in Boston, and I could definitely see him fitting there. The next guy is another international player, that being Nolan Traore, who's coming over from France. Again, someone who me and Josh at Crossover U aren't too familiar with just because he played overseas. But I hear he's a little bit of an undersized guard, but he does have good burst and passing, which is definitely something you want out of a guy who is a little bit undersized for an NBA point guard. Armaan, do you see any teams in this range of the first round needing a point guard that might pull the trigger on Nolan Traore?
You could see Utah. I mean, another one of those younger project kind of guys. He averaged 7.4 assists per game, so it looks like he's a pretty good playmaker. So I could see Utah being a team. They're picking at 21. The Nets are picking 26, 27. They're going to be a fit. The Suns at 29 could also be a fit. Those teams are all lacking point guard depth, and adding a guy like this to their team could be beneficial. I mean, I could also see the Clippers at 30 taking a guy like this, but the Clippers, it's weird because I feel like they're going to probably want to go with more of a win now. So I'd say the Jazz, Nets, or Suns probably is my favorite fit here.
Definitely.
Now, getting on to our 25th guy in our big board, that being Danny Wolf, 7-foot point guard, whatever you want to call him. If you heard the player comps to Nikola Jokic, do I think he'll be that caliber of a player in the NBA? Probably not. Not slight to Danny Wolf whatsoever. Brings such a unique skill set to the table for whatever NBA team ends up picking him. Josh, talk a little bit about how you feel about Danny after his really successful year for Dusty May at Michigan.
I love Danny. I think he's a guy that could be as high as late lottery. Don't mind him being a later first round pick. I think he once again very underrated guy. I'm sure though where he would play. I think that's why he's so lower rated in this draft board in most NBA prospects' eyes. I think personally, him being a point guard will be very fun, and we do see the Jokic comps with great passing, great shooting, great off the turn into a center with good three-point shooting and good passing. And that might be the better position for him. Really unsure though, which is why I'm fine with him being here in the later part of this draft.
I'm not gonna lie to you. I wanted the Pacers to get him so bad until they traded the pick to get their first round pick next year, which that was the right decision. They're Halburn's gonna be out, so the Pacers was actually the team I really wanted to see Danny Wolf go to. Now, I could see the Heat wanting to maybe getting him, maybe not actually. They have Khalil Ware, but I could see like the Hawks. The teams like the Spurs could honestly be interested. The Thunder, just having another guy could put Chet at the 4. The Nets, if they want to move off of Claxton, could be a fit here. But this is actually one of my favorite players. Non-lottery players in this whole class. He could fit in a lot of places. I could see him in Minnesota too. I don't know how high up he'll go because Minnesota's picking at 17. I don't really know how high up he'll go, but I think he's a great player. But Thunder, they have 15 and 24. They could take him. It's just that. Yeah, that's about it. I mean, the Pacers was actually my perfect fit for him, but that's not going to happen now.
Yeah, I like the Thunder pick. I definitely think Isaiah Hartenstein. I'm not aware as to how much longer he has on his deal, but I definitely think he's someone who is expendable. 2 years. Okay. Well, I definitely think I would rule him out of trade talks and whatnot at some point for the Thunder. But I definitely think if Daniel was someone you want to sit behind Isaiah Hardenstein, then he's someone who could definitely learn a lot and definitely fit into that Thunder team. Moving on to 26, we have Cedric Coward. This was someone who was committed to Duke in the transfer portal, but ended up choosing to stay in the NBA draft. He's someone that I am quite high on, is a little bit older, and is somewhat unproven just considering we didn't really see him play at the high major level. He did play at Washington State, but he did miss a year due to injury. I definitely think he has great positional size. He's 6'5", has a really long wingspan of 7'2", and I think for someone who is a little bit older at 21 years old, he does have a lot more upside than guys you see around that age. He only played 6 games this past year before hurting his shoulder. So again, you're kind of going off of the limited tape to really get a good read off of the type of player Cedric Coward's going to be. But from what I heard, he had a really good showing at the combine, which is why he might end up going first round and probably why he ended up choosing not to go to Duke.
No, I definitely agree with this one. Honestly, once again, guy who could sneak his way into the late lottery at his high. Gives me a lot of Jalen Williams vibes, how he kind of went from that Santa Clara guy who no one really thought of to a late lottery pick in 22, and look how that went out. I don't know if he has a ceiling like that, but he's definitely a guy that fits a ton of roles, a complete glue guy that can come off the bench, that can start theoretically at his prime. Really unsure where he goes there. Like, very, very unsure as to who he can be as a player, because here I was thinking he was going to be a mainstay at Duke and would find himself in the late lottery next year. He is an older guy, so once again, a plug-and-play type of player, but I'll leave it to Armaan to say where the best places to put Coward right now.
I'm going to start off with the Spurs. I mean, their wing depth it's there, but, he could improve upon that. The Thunder, obviously, if they want. But, I mean, in terms of, guys who can come, places he could come in right now and probably start the Suns. I think if he fell to 29, he probably won't. But the Clippers, I like the Clippers fit a little bit at 30. I don't know if he'll fall there though. The Nets, just a team that could, use another wing. Like the Hawks, there's another team I could see. I mean, I feel like, yeah, I would say the Hawks are probably my favorite spot for him. I feel like at 22, just because you could plug him in next to Jalen Johnson and Trae Young and still get a really good type of really good thing going for next year.
Yeah, and moving on, we have Rasheer Fleming, just played at St. Joseph's this past year, so a guy who is coming from the mid-major level, similar to Nick Clifford. You didn't see him play against the highest level of competition, but he was really productive this past year for St. Joseph's. He is a guy who has great size, is a really talented scorer, 3-level guy. I definitely think he has lots of upside. Josh, I'm curious as to how you view his draft stock.
I'm not against Rasheer Fleming being in the top 30 in the first round. He definitely has, once again, more raw talent here at St. Joe's, so not a high major prospect. You're going to see a guy like this coming typically in the draft. Pretty good ceiling for a guy like him. Once again, don't think he'd be a starter. I think the best place right now is from the G League and see how he plays. But he can pop off. He had great scoring numbers at St. Joe's, was a leading man for most of that year. I think, honestly, he is a very underrated prospect in some ways. Unsure where he goes. I'll leave that to Armaan.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the same places for Nick Clifford could be here. I mean, he's a bit worse, I would say. I feel like Boston actually would. I actually like a fit with him with Boston. How would you feel about him going to either of your guys' teams? Because he's projected to go in that range with the Heat at 20 and the Nets at 26, 27, and 19.
I have seen several mocks with the Heat drafting Rasheer. I wouldn't necessarily mind it, but at the same time, I feel like it's kind of starting to get redundant now with the wings on the roster between Jovic, which has been on and off as a starter and guy who I don't know how much Spoelstra believes in, as opposed to how much the front office seems to believe in him. But again, I kind of don't want it ending up in a similar situation to that. I just don't think wings are necessarily what the Heat need right now, outside of just considering that they could probably get a fair package for Wiggins, which I think they end up moving on from him this offseason. We'll see what ends up happening with that. But yeah, I mean, if he ends up in Miami, I'm not mad at it. I definitely think he's going to end up being a pretty solid player down the road.
Yeah, I definitely see the point. I don't know how he performed in Brooklyn. I think he would start off in the G League, like I said before. I think he's definitely a guy that can blossom under like a less pressured environment, which I think is such a big deal nowadays in the NBA. Can't really thrust most of your rookies, especially rookies in the late first and second round, into a starting position because that typically doesn't work for them. And I think Fleming is a perfect model of that. But he is great for development. I think he's a guy that could really be a big thing in the next few years.
I do like the fit with Brooklyn a little bit more than with Miami. I feel like Miami probably wants, the Miami, like, they want more of a guard than a wing. So, and I mean, they did try to go get KD, but I don't know. Pat Riley is who knows what is he wants at this point. I can
Right.
see the Pelicans, because Josh brought up less pressured environments. I mean, the Pelicans might be the most like least pressured environment outside of maybe like the Hornets or the Wizards or something. They don't really have a pick in this range, so I could see the fit here with the Pelicans or again, Brooklyn.
Yeah, definitely. I do like those fits better than what it would be if he ends up getting drafted in Miami. Now, Josh, how do you feel about Drake Powell coming off his freshman year at UNC?
I really like Drake Powell too much. I'm going to be real. I think he should have stayed. I don't really see him as a first rounder fully. He can definitely sneak his way into that position, but he just needed more time. He's kind of like how me and you have viewed Elliot Cadeau in a way. I think that maybe some more outside shooting, he would find himself in this scenario, but I think this is a guy that you don't really want to swing on, especially for younger teams that could use straightaway talent. He's kind of a trap in that scene. I don't really want to stunt his development either, but I think that going to the draft wasn't really the best move.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I think second round to Charlotte and having him just play in the G League probably
I think
is
that's
the
a very
best move.
smart.
Yeah, that'd probably be the best route for him to go.
Like
Now, oh, go ahead.
you said that he's just not polished enough, because I don't know much about this guy, but like this mock draft has him going at 36 to Brooklyn. I mean, I feel like he has to go to a team like Brooklyn, Charlotte, Pelicans. He needs to sit in the G League. That's all there is.
Yeah, I'm definitely in the same boat where I think the G League would probably be the best route for him to take to further develop before being a piece on an NBA roster.
Yeah, I
Next
feel like
guy's Maxime Reynad Reynad, I should say, from Stanford. Played center for them this past year. He is a little bit older at 22 years old. Kind of was in a backseat role to Isaiah Sellers at times of the year on that Stanford roster. But he's a guy who definitely, I think, down the road could develop into being a solid center. I don't think he'll be a star at any point of his career by any means. But Armaan, I'm curious as to where you see him
Oh, I
fitting.
like I like this fit with Phoenix at 29. You have him at 29. You're in the big board. Having him at 29, that's the Suns pick. I feel like the Suns, they need a center. I'm just looking at his numbers at Stanford last year. He was averaging a double-double, 11 and a half rebounds per game, 21 and a half points. He averaged 1.5 blocks and a steal per game. I feel like the Suns need to build a defensive identity, and drafting this guy at 29, I think, would be the right step towards that, especially with Dylan Brooks now there.
Yeah. And now rounding out our top 30 on our big board, we have Ryan Kalkbrenner, one of the greatest Creighton Blue Jays of all time. 5 years for that program out in Omaha. Really disciplined center, doesn't foul. I don't think he ever fouled out of a single collegiate game in his career. Definitely, I think, needs to improve the consistency shooting outside a little bit. And he's not someone he's really the best scoring back to the basket. Definitely struggles against guys who share the same height and wingspan as him. And he tends to struggle against more aggressive and physical centers. But again, it's hard to ignore what he's done defensively. I believe he was a 3, maybe 4-time Big East Defensive Player of the Year at Creighton, and 3-time. Yeah, again, I'm really high on Ryan Kalkbrenner. Again, I don't think he's going to be a star at any point of his career, but he's someone who's going to play, I think, a role and be able to contribute right away to a contending team.
Easily. He is probably the best defender on this top 30 list. He kind of gives me that perhaps Luke Cornett style play with a greater defense, I think, than Cornett. And honestly, the Celtics comp is a good one. Bring up Cornett, I think Armaan could definitely harp on that point. But Kalkbrenner, he is an older guy, but you want to put him on a strengthened team, and once again, plug and play. I think he's a guy that can immediately step onto the court and be a guy for a team. Definitely a person who will be more of a backup center role, but you want to have minutes for this man next year. I think he's definitely a big role type of guy.
I do like the fit again, like Maxime Reynaud with Phoenix at 29 or the Celtics at 28. I think those two are probably my favorite fits for him if he were to go in the first round. I mean, Celtics also have pick 32. That's where he's actually mocked at this mock draft I'm looking at. So I do like the Celtics, especially if they are going to move off of Porzingis, while Horford's going to go to, they could use some big men's up. So I like the fit with the Celtics a lot.
Definitely. So while that does conclude our top 30, we're not going to touch on the second round, but I did just want to throw out some sleeper picks that me and Josh had regarding some of the college guys who might be a little bit older, aren't going to go in the first round, but do have a chance to carve out roles in the NBA. Those guys being Janai Brew, Mark Sears, Caleb Love, Jameer Watkins, Chaz Lanier. Josh, I'll let you add to that list if there were any that came to mind immediately.
Oh, you do as well? Let's see.
Well, I'm going to see if you say him first or not.
And I honestly don't really think there's a need to add anybody else. I will say maybe Yannick Kahn, Niehauser from Penn State. He was definitely a late riser. I could see him possibly getting starter minutes in his career. He definitely has this impact, but I like a lot of the choices you made, especially the complete ball dogs that have been Mark Sears and Caleb Love. Careers of just being buckets. They are undersized guards in the NBA, so I'm unsure how they'll go. This is projected to be drafted. I'm not so sure about Caleb Love, but I feel like these are guys that would be bench players for most of their careers and could be very solid off those positions. I like a lot of the comps that I've been given for these guys. And the second round is very deep. This is one of the better second rounds I've personally seen in the past few years, and I like a lot of the guys in there.
Oh, yeah. And my guy was Tyrese Proctor. I think he's pretty good.
It's a good one. Yeah, that's a good pick.
Yeah. He had a really strong showing in the NCAA tournament where he seemingly could have missed from three until they played Houston.
I think he's gonna probably end up in Sacramento at 42. I think he's gonna be a really good point guard for them.
Just to throw out a few more names that I'm honestly shocked I kind of forgot to mention. Kobe Bryant won at Kentucky, one of the most efficient 3-point shooters we've seen in the 2020s. I mean, shooting near 50% in his last year at Dayton, and then nearly same thing for the up until the midway point of the season for Kentucky this past year, ended the season around 42%, which is still really, really good. Someone who has great size on the wing at around 6'6", 6'7"-ish. And I think he's going to bring great shot making from beyond the arc. Another guy, RJ Lewis, was Big East Player of the Year this past year, needs to improve the consistency shooting from outside and off the dribble too, but he's really good at attacking the basket, can get it to the mid-range a little bit at times. And on top of that, I mean, maybe just one more to throw out there, Micah Peavy. I really did like what I saw out of PV in once Thomas Sorber went down. He kind of had to become the dude for Georgetown in the late stretch of the year.
Yeah, I also forgot to mention Ryan Nembhard, the brother of Andrew Nembhard.
Yeah.
I actually like him a lot. I mean,
best passers.
Because, I'm a Pacers fan, but I do like Ryan Nembhard a lot.
Yeah, I definitely think he has a chance to carve out a role as an NBA potentially starting point guard at some point in his career. But I think it's pretty much going to wrap up everything for this episode today. We'd like to thank you if you stuck around for the entire duration of this episode. I know it was a longer one, but this was our top 30 big board. Of course, again, it's not a mock draft. We're not necessarily saying that where we had these guys listed in terms of where we ranked them is where they're going to end up getting picked. Of course, you can look at mock drafts if you want that. But we're really excited to see where some of our favorite players from this past year's college season end up. Excited to see how they grow and build upon their games and play once they get into the NBA. But again, if you can engage with our content any way you can, it really does help with growing our channel. Until next episode, we'll see you all next time.